I trust you've had a fruitful day. I do not say happy, though I hope it has been a happy one. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Homage to the Buddha, the blessed, noble, and fully self-awakened one. Oh, the lights just went off and on. It's interesting. We'll see what happens. I thought today we would move on to a different discourse. So this is the one we're meeting a character called Pancakanda. Now, Pancakanda was the carpenter to King Pasenadi, that's in the north of the Ganges, and the Buddha's at Jeta's Grove, Anathapindika's Park. So if you remember, that's Anathapindika was a rich merchant who bought him a load of land from a prince called Jeta. And he's called Pancha. Now it says that Pancakanda was his name, but I can't really believe that because it actually means 5 tools. And his 5 tools were an adze. You might not know what an adze is, but I myself have seen one actually in action. So I'm very familiar with an adze. It's like a pick, a small pick, but it's only got the wide end and it's sharp. And it's used for shaping wood crudely in a way. For instance, a trunk which you want to turn into a square beam, so you would use an adze. He's got a chisel, which is finer. He's got a measuring stick. He's got a gavel, a small hammer, and he's got a blackened thread. So that's he probably walked around with those and became known as Pancakanda. Anyway, he likes discussion. He likes to talk about the Dharma and things. And he was thinking of going to see the Buddha, but he knew he'd be on alms round or something. So he went to see this other ascetic called Samanamandika Putta, so the son of Mandika. So we'll just call him Mandika for short. And Mandika is in the park, in this particular park. Lots of these samanas around him, these recluses, and they're all chatting away. And when he sees Pancakanda come, he says, "Sirs, be quiet, sirs, make no noise. Here comes the carpenter, Pancakanda, a disciple of the recluse Gautama, one of the recluse's white-clothed lay disciples staying at Savatthi," that's the capital. "These venerable ones like quiet. They are disciplined in quiet. They commend quiet. Perhaps if he finds our assembly a quiet one, he will come to join us." So there's this reputation that the Buddhist monks have, that they don't make a noise when they come together. Now, this silence was taken to a rather far degree, because lay people came to the Buddha at one point and said, "Look, we approach, the ascetics of other schools and teachers. We ask them questions and they get into a discussion with us. But when we ask your monks and nuns questions, they just sit there like dumb pigs." So he made a rule. The rule is, if somebody asks me a question of the Dharma, I have to answer it, or else it's an offense. Anyway, they've got this reputation, and he gets into a conversation with Mandika, and Mandika tells him that I describe somebody who's accomplished in what is wholesome, perfected in what is wholesome, attained to the supreme attainment, an ascetic invincible with these 4 qualities. He does no evil bodily actions. He does no evil speech. He has no evil intentions. And he does not make a living by any evil livelihood. So Pancakanda just listens, he neither approves nor disapproves. And he wanders away thinking, well, I'll see what the Blessed One thinks about that. So he goes to see the Blessed One and he repeats this. And the Blessed One replies, the Buddha replies, Well, now, if this were so, carpenter, then a young, tender infant lying prone is accomplished in what is wholesome, perfected in what is wholesome, attained to the supreme attainment, an ascetic invincible. For a young, tender infant lying prone does not even have the notion body. So how could he perform an evil act beyond mere wriggling? A young, tender infant lying prone does not even have the notion speech. So how should he utter evil speech beyond mere whining? A young, tender infant lying prone does not even have the notion intention. So how could he have evil intentions apart from sulking? A young, tender infant prone does not even have the notion livelihood. So how could he make his living by evil livelihood beyond being suckled at his mother's breast? So if that were so, carpenter, then a young, tender infant lying prone is accomplished, etc., and an ascetic invincible. So that's the Buddha's opinion of Mandika's understanding of what it is to be fully liberated. Then, having demolished that, he now begins to tell us that he tells Pancakanda that in fact there are 10 qualities that I describe as accomplished in what is wholesome. As the lights again, message from the gods. So the first one is a person knows these are unwholesome habits. Unwholesome habits originate from this. Unwholesome habits cease without remainder here. And one practicing in this way is practicing the way to the cessation of unwholesome habits. So that, of course, is a sign of somebody who's liberated. And he also says these are unwholesome habits. So we have wholesome habits. Wholesome habits originate from this, and wholesome habits cease without remainder here. So even wholesome habits come to an end. Now, where do unwholesome habits originate? They originate from the mind, right? Now, this word chitta is really heart-mind. So whenever you read mind here in Bhikkhu Bodhi's translations and in others too, remember it always includes your emotional life, your emotional commitment to things. So the mind is multiple, varied, and different, and of different aspects. There is a mind which is affected by greed, hatred, and delusion. Unwholesome habits originate from this, right? Where do unwholesome habits cease without remainder? Here, a person abandons bodily misconduct, develops good bodily conduct. He abandons verbal misconduct and develops good verbal conduct. He abandons mental misconduct and develops good mental conduct. How practicing does he practice the way to the cessation? And what does he do? And these, of course, are the 4 right efforts. The first one is he awakens zeal for the non-arising of unarisen evil states. In other words, to make sure that that unwholesome states don't arise. And then when they do arise, he awakens zeal to abandon them. When wholesome states arise, he awakens zeal for their continuance, not their disappearance, strengthening, increase, and fulfillment by developing them. And of course, he makes an effort and strives to bring new wholesome mental states to bear. And it's the same with the wholesome states too. This is what he does, right? So it's always the 4 great efforts, whether it's wholesome or unwholesome states. Now, we're talking about, at the end he says, where do these wholesome habits cease without remainder? Their cessation is stated. Here a bhikkhu is virtuous, but he does not identify with his virtue. And he understands as he actually is the deliverance of mind and the deliverance by wisdom, where these wholesome habits cease without remainder. So now we come to the Arahat, somebody who's completed the path. And he says they are deliverance of mind. Now, the deliverance of mind is, of course, the purity, the deliverance from the taints, those oozings. And the deliverance by wisdom, of course, is the direct insight into the way things really are. Now, at that point, when an Arahat speaks or thinks or does something, it has this special quality of there not being a self involved, of there not being an attachment involved. So it's a very pure, spontaneous action. You can't aim to be spontaneous. The whole point about spontaneity is that it arises spontaneously. And they have in the Abhidhamma, the higher teaching, they have a special word for the actions of that, and that is kriya, which translates as sort of functional. So so long as we are unawakened, unenlightened, our actions will always have some quality of self. If they're unwholesome, of course, we don't want them. But even when they are wholesome actions, there'll be some attachment, there'll be some identification with the action. So by practicing these four great efforts, this is how we come to the end of both wholesome and unwholesome, wholesome and unwholesome and wholesome actions. So the words in Pali are kusala, akusala, wholesome, unwholesome, and then this special category for those who are completely liberated, kriya, or functional. And then he goes on about wholesome intentions. So you've got unwholesome intentions. So the first are actions, and the second one is intentions, unwholesome and wholesome intentions. So these intentions are, of course, for sensual desire, ill will, and the intention for cruelty. So this is the second on the Eightfold Path, if you remember, the right intention or right attitude. And where do these originate? They originate in perception. They originate in perception and concepts. So an intention is always something ahead of you. You're always looking into the future. Oh, there we go again. That's the lights. Thank you very much. You're always looking into the future. And therefore, it comes from some idea, some ideation, some ideal. You're always working towards some perception of where you're going to go. That's why an intention is based on perceptions. And it's, of course, multiple, varied, of different aspects. But you can draw them down in terms of unwholesome ones to sensual desire, ill will, and cruelty. Now, where do they cease? Well, they cease through, believe it or not, meditation, quiet, secluded from sensual pleasures, secluded from unwholesome states. A person abides in the first jhana. So the first jhana, first absorption, pushes these down. Remember, they don't cure them, right? They don't get rid of unwholesome states. That can only be done through allowing them to come up into consciousness and to expend their energy. That's part of the process of vipassana. But here, at least temporarily, they are suppressed. Now, what are wholesome intentions? Well, they are, of course, the opposite. Renunciation, instead of always grasping and acquisitiveness, non-ill will, which includes all this business about love and all that, you see, and goodwill, and the intention not to be cruel, which, of course, leads you to compassion. And again, they arise out of perception. They arise out of concepts. They arise out of ideals, because an intention is always future bound. And of course, they finish without remainder. So where do they go without remainder? So that, of course, again, we're talking about the Arahat. We're talking about someone who's fully liberated, and that comes about through partly through the practice of jhana, but in our practice of dry vipassana, pure vipassana, it comes about through practice again. So again, and of course, you awaken the zeal to to stop unarisen, unwholesome intentions to arise. And when unwholesome intentions do arise, you abandon them. When wholesome intentions come up, you of course exercise them, and you try to develop even more in wholesomeness. So we have a final paragraph that sums up for us the 10 qualities that are needed for somebody who is perfected in what is wholesome, attained to supreme attainment, and is an ascetic invincible. So the first 8, I think you'll recognize. Here the bhikkhu possesses right view of one beyond training, so of the right view of an arahat, the right intention of one beyond training, the right speech of one beyond training, the right action of one beyond training, the right livelihood, the right effort, the right mindfulness, and the right concentration. But also the number 9 and number 10 is right knowledge and right deliverance. So right knowledge, of course, is that direct perception of the deathless. And the right deliverance is, of course, from the taints, the oozings. And this is the way the Buddha describes someone who's accomplished in what is wholesome, perfected in what is wholesome, attained in the supreme attainment, an ascetic invincible. That's what the Blessed One said, and the carpenter Pancakanda was satisfied and delighted in the Blessed One's words. So we've met another character from our discourses, and hopefully you've also found that in some way inspiring, I hope, and that it will drive you relentlessly towards your liberation, which will happen hopefully sooner rather than later. So we can do a bit of practice. And don't worry about the lights coming off and on. It's just one of those things we are suffering at the moment.